So the topic of this panel is quite big, let's say, growing a successful biotech startup. And it's actually usually like a very long journey and very risky journey to make a successful startup or biotech company, right? And even if you had really good science, there are a lot of many other factors that you need to get right in order to make it to the finish line, let's say. And also, these factors can be very different depending on what stage of development you are along this, this long journey. So to talk about these different challenges, we have today speakers in different stages of development. So we have Thomas. He's the CEO of Amylon Therapeutics. It's a company working on RNA for CNS disorders. And it was, I think, it was founded less than a year ago, right? September, so very young company. And we also have Shelley Margetson. She works in immuno-oncology, and her company is just about to enter the clinical stage. And then we have Ajan, whose company is doing cell therapy, and it's now in the late stages of development. So let's start with the first steps for a biotech company with Thomas. So what would you say is like the main challenge you're facing right now in your company?
I think the main challenge is as a young startup is that you're both, you're trying to develop your compound and raising funds, but you're also educating the world of your presence. So you kind of go out and tell the world, look, we're here. We're also working on a problem you've never heard of, but we have a solution and we'd like you to share in that journey. And so the interesting part is that, the Amylon was a long time coming for a few years, and we spent research and development in the shadows. And so for us, it was a reality that was, it was our universe. And then you go out into the public and the whole world doesn't know about you. And it is my job to kind of educate the world that we're here and we're here to stay and here to grow. And that becomes a whole paradigm shift from, having everyone around you who believes 100% in what you're doing to kind of going out into the public and then facing a lot of new opinions, but also a lot of skepticism and a lot of enthusiasm, and basically having to expose your baby to the whole world and deal with the backlash of it. And that is a very interesting process that you can, I think, only experience once and have to make the most out of it as you grow.
Mm-hmm. Have you experienced similar challenges when you were starting, perhaps?
Well, Gadeta is now 2 years old.
No, just hold it closer.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, so Gadeta started end of 2015, so he's a little bit older. I nearly feel, like a teenager compared to Thomas. But so different challenges, I think, because we work in immuno-oncology, so everyone knows that that's a very, very popular field is not quite the right word, but I think if I use it, you all know what I mean. It's where people are very active in, there's a lot of money going in it, but there's also a lot of companies in immuno-oncology. So the challenges that we see most of all are where you have to differentiate yourself from other companies. Now, we are a platform company, so we have to very much explain how do we differentiate from other companies. So you're comparing yourselves to others. Now, if you've got your story right, you manage to convince people of that, so that's not a problem. But then it's not only attracting finance, it's also attracting talent, talent to work within the company. And that's where I find is one of the biggest challenges of a company that's moving into the clinic. So we need the next stage of people. We have great scientists, we have great technicians, and we now need to start attracting the next level of people. So we're moving into the clinic, we need regulatory, we need clinical, we need clinical. The competition is immense, and the talent pool is limited, and more so in Europe than in the US. So it becomes a very costly affair to identify people, and very, very difficult to attract them to then come to Utrecht rather than Boston or New York.
Yeah,
so I think that is one of the biggest problems that we are challenging.
Okay.
Thank you. Yes, so Celixir is old. Yes. So we're 8 and a bit years old. We had all the skepticism issues at the very beginning, but the challenges are really interesting. So you get. I think the way biotech companies grow is not linear. I think it's in steps. So we just did a big board reshuffle. So this is my third board now. So we've changed 80% of our board. And I think the way we look at things is we think about talent as the key thing. We have a platform technology which we believe has great potential, so it's up to us to deliver that potential. And so we think of the technology as a living entity that needs support, and the level of support you need as a company varies as you grow. So our new board is majority US. It's a majority of people who have got experience in large biotech companies, listed companies. And as I said, that's our third board. So, the way we look at our sort of growth is through big changes. And I think these guys are going through all of those changes. So, your first step is your technology. Second step is choosing the right indication to take to market, getting through the clinic. And then we've just gone through manufacturing, and now US trials is our next step. So, yeah, I think there are many challenges, but it's how you structure your changes and you structure your growth to be consistent.
Yeah, definitely. And something interesting that you mentioned, Shelley, was about location. So, as you said, obviously the US is very popular, but you've all been working in companies in Europe. How do you do that? How do you attract the best people here?
By convincing them that our technology is a great technology, and therefore it's exciting to work for us. It is difficult. What you are is you are at a disadvantage to many other companies, even UK's. Your UK agent, and I think there it's already easier to attract people. The Netherlands is a small country, and it is difficult to get people to relocate to the Netherlands. So then you have to start working with people commuting, so they'll live somewhere else in Europe and they'll come for 4 days a week, and immediately your business model changes a bit, because what you ideally want is to have a small team of very efficient, very productive people who work closely together, and that changes the moment you have people working away. And I know it's all possible, and I know with modern communications you can do that, but it changes the dynamics. So how we do it is with the strength of our platform.
Okay, yeah.
It's interesting that you mentioned that, Shelley, because I think the big difference, and you guys both mentioned this, since you have a platform technology, for us, talent recruitment is crucial, and I guess at a bit of a higher position that for building out the management team, building out the board is a very good validation of the presence of your company. The interesting part is that for me, it's not about what we have as much as about what it could be, and so it's a very interesting challenge, because it's kind of my challenge to convince very accomplished people to join the company based on limited resources, but on the promise what it could be and the whole story behind it. And that makes for a very interesting challenge, because in reality the company is very small and we have very direct challenges to face. But at the same time, I spend most of my time talking about everything that it could be if all succeeds, and that becomes let's say the divergence between those two realities. You have to keep a really close track to them, that you don't lose yourself in the ideas of what your company will be, as opposed to what you actually have to do on a day-to-day basis to get people on board. And I think that's interesting, because you both mentioned technology platforms, and that for us is still, we still have to prove that there's a technology platform there. But the recruitment still is a very high point on our agenda.
Okay. And how is it when you arrive at the later stages?
It's different set of challenges, actually. So, I spend a lot of time in Boston, as we talked about, and there the culture is very different. It's relatively easy to get super talented people to come and join a startup, because everyone wants to do it. No one wants to go and work I used to work for a big consulting company. No one wants to do that now. No one wants to work for an investment bank. It's not very cool. We'd much rather work in a startup. So I think it's a cultural issue. I think it's finding places where people are willing to take risk. The issue for us actually is that late stage clinical trials are actually pretty straightforward. You design the trial, you get the regulator to approve it, and then because it's a phase 3 or a phase 2b, it's a pivotal trial, you can't actually do very much. So then what do you do with all these fabulously talented people that want to do cool new stuff? So our challenge, which is we were talking about, we've got quite a big pipeline, So we've got some immuno-oncology, we've got some siRNA, we've got some other modified products. So what we see is the team that took our products into late stage is now going back and taking a whole new range of products into late stage. So that's the way we manage it, and we retain people. But recruiting, I think, is difficult in Europe. I mean, that would be my takeaway. It's tough to recruit in Europe. It's easier in London. We're about half an hour from Oxford, so that works. But it's relatively easy to recruit if you've got a really sexy technology in Boston or in South San Francisco.
Thank you.
So, if I could comment on that, it's very interesting because you mentioned Boston, and we have, specifically for that purpose, we are partially relocating a presence to Boston. And I was very curious about why, why is there such a difference between Europe and US, and specifically Boston. And one of the things I heard from the director at Mass Bio, who had a big role into kind of establishing the presence in Boston, is that it's actually quite simple, because you have this breeding ground where startups come and they grow and they succeed, they get bought out, and then that talent goes back into the job market, basically. And so there's a whole circulating presence of incredible talent. In fact, the better they do, the more likely you will be able to encounter them for your startup.
Yeah, I guess I've got a slightly more cynical take on that. And my caveat is, before I started this company, I was a deal maker. So I worked at Roche. I was an M&A director and then head of. So my take on this is slightly different, which is, if you're in an environment like Europe where we don't have a lot of success stories, people tend to be more risk adverse, because the heuristic is we've seen failure. Therefore, I don't want to be the guy that invested in, or the lady that invested and lost their money. In Boston, it's the different dynamic. If you're not getting into the next best thing, if you're not in CRISPR, if you're not in synthetic biology, whatever it is, then people will come to you and say, well, why are you not in this? So the dynamic of risk changes. And then it's also much easier, you walk around and you see many people who are in their early 30s who have done 4 or 5 startups, of which 3 or 4 have been successful. And now a good Series A that we talk about is a 200 million Series A. So the dynamic is totally different. There is a lot of capital in Europe, but the heuristic, the thing that people remember, is the failures, not the successes. In Boston, there is a large number of successes.
So we have a question here. Yeah.
Is that allowed? Is that okay?
Yeah, of course.
So I have a comment, maybe more of a comment than a question. I see it slightly differently. I transplanted from the US to Europe, hence the accent, but I can speak Dutch like a native. We work together quite a lot with growing biotechs in all different phases. And what I see is that, especially in Europe, a lot of people talk the talk of wanting to join biotech because it's sexy and it's dynamic and it's not so stuck in bureaucracy. So we're actually innovating, which is what most of the people in industry, especially in clinical, really want to be doing amidst all of the rules. The challenge is that we in biotech, just like pharma, talk the talk about needing the people. We rely more heavily on them, I would say, than large pharma does. But we don't often actually take the action to behave differently. So we know we're sexier, so we're the cute person in the bar, right? Everyone wants to talk to us. But we don't always take the actions to behave better than other pharma companies do. And I think that still is something that can easily be won. We are always going to be more volatile. That aligns with the risk piece. In the US, you are a better entrepreneur. So I am seen as better. If I would have had a failed business, of the 3, they're all successful. So, ooh. But one of those failed business is a positive. It's a gold star in the US. And here, I might say to friends of 5.5 years ago, I set up my own company and they say, ooh, are you sure you're going to be able to pay their mortgage or their salaries? And in the US, they're like, cool, that's a dream. So it's a completely different culture. You are talking a lot about inherent culture and behavioral risk more than the way that people see their careers or jobs. I think loyalty here is higher. We also run a recruitment business. We work together with US companies, which we work more often with because they have a higher turnover a lot of the time. Here, the turnover is lower. So it's a balancing bag. I don't think that one region is better than the other. The culture is more matching biotech in the US, I would say. I would agree with that. But I think that as an industry, if we know that talent is the thing that we need, we also need to be behaving better than big pharma does to their talent?
Yeah, I find that an interesting one because I would like some definition on what behaving better is, because my experience is, well, give the definition first, then I'll, yeah. Go on.
Uh-oh. Well, my definition would be more, let's just take the recruitment process. So we are more volatile because I speak to you, you have success, which you do, and I want to hire you, but I don't know if I have money. So I'm going to lead you around the room until I'm sure I can hire you, which is logical because I can't offer anything I don't have. However, in the recruitment process, I then also want you to talk to the 7 different people and to them and the others before I ask you to make a decision. I mean more in, if we're going to be quick and innovative, that the recruitment process is that as well. That we utilize some technology platforms that are out there to show what is it like when I walk into your office in Utrecht, which is why it's cooler to work there than in the middle of Boston, although I don't know, but yeah. That's what I mean, taking advantage of what's out there and not going, oh, this old-fashioned bureaucratic recruitment process is fine for us. That's what I mean.
No, and that I couldn't support more. I fully support. I think I thought when you meant treating your people better, and I think that's one of the challenges that I see a lot, is that I think it is very much a cultural difference. I agree, and I think nobody could disagree with that, because I think in Europe, attracting people out of big pharma into biotech is nearly impossible. And the reason is they're quite curious and they'll come and chat to you, but then they hear that there won't be a company car and there won't be a fixed bonus and there won't be all these, but you will get equity. Yeah, but equity, that doesn't pay for my holidays and that doesn't drive me to go to work. And they want the biotech, but they don't want to give up on all the certainties with pharma. Now, I think in the US, people are much more willing to do that. And I think some do it more successfully than others, because I think not everybody can make that step from big pharma to biotech. It is very, very different. Suddenly, you don't have an assistant working for you, making all your appointments, but you're expected to do it yourself and book your flights. I mean, you haven't done that for years. Some can deal with it, some can't, but I think the pool is much bigger in the US, and therefore you can attract the people there. But then attracting those to Europe is a step further again. So I think you're right, but ultimately it is a cultural difference.
I think the other thing in the US, though, just as a contrapoint here, typically most of my friends who are leaving big pharma to a biotech in Boston also are getting paid exactly the same. So they get paid the same and they get stock options. Yeah. So there's no difference in salary. People are moving. We talked about a spectacular example where people are getting paid more.
But that's where you have a round of 200 million, right, which you don't see in Europe.
Yeah. But I think what is kind of more general is perhaps this concept of what the different, we talked about it, if that's helpful. We talked about the different kind of philosophies. So, I mean, maybe if I start, the philosophy we had when we started our company was that we would do everything in-house. So, we made that as a conscious decision that we would do everything we possibly could in-house and we wouldn't outsource anything. And if we had to outsource something, we'd outsource it once, learn how to do it, and then bring it in-house. We're not saying that's right or wrong, it's just different. And that's helped us because I wouldn't say we're at the forefront, but we're one of the early companies in terms of doing late-stage trials. We've had multiple interactions with EMA, with the FDA. We've built our own manufacturing facility. We're now doing our second manufacturing facility and third manufacturing facility. So what we found is there's a lot of stuff in the cell therapy world which other people haven't done. So our logic, right or wrong, was there wasn't any point outsourcing it because actually no one else has done it anyway. So you might as well learn it yourself. And what's helped us in that process is we've then been able to innovate. So because you understand it to the depth of actually having to implement, improving it is easy for you. And so that's how we built our company. So we built our company from people learning deep expertise in one field and then moving to another field. So they have the confidence that they can get to the nth level of detail and the practical implementation in something which is very, very difficult. You can then give them another task and they're excited about doing something else because they have that confidence.
See, it's interesting because we brushed upon this earlier. There's no really right or wrong. It's personal preference, but also what you describe, I think in CNS is quite opposite. The amount of knowledge out there in the world is vastly higher on basic academics and basic research than there is in industry. So us bringing everything in-house for CNS research will kind of be like reinventing the wheel. And then it is not my personal preference or that of Amylon in general to build a big company. Nevertheless, I think that if you want to outsource, you still need key strategic people that are just the best in the business. And the interesting part is, and you mentioned this, that you hire someone into biotech and a pharma executive or someone, you still have to pay them the same salary, but add stock options. And if you don't have those funds, you still need to do it because it's kind of considered a rite of passage. You have to, as a startup, you have to show that you can convince the best people in the world that they can anticipate and come on board on an impossible challenge, and then you're kind of you check the box of, okay, this is what you need to do. Same for the board and for your assets. And so it's interesting that on the one hand, it's an impossible challenge, but the system is kind of veered towards it. You have to do this to show that you're ready for the next stage. And the interesting part is that for us, time is more expensive than money. And so you're faced with very binary decisions. Do you give up half your cash position to hire a chief medical officer? Or do you bootstrap and go on your technology and hope you can raise money and talent on the basis of that? So in other words, do you pick momentum or do you pick science? And I think both have shown to be incredibly, Denali and Moderna, we talked about this earlier, I think, but two sides of the same coin. One is momentum, the other is science. And there's no one reason for success, but you kind of have to choose one and then hope it's a good decision, because there's no going back from either one of them.
Just to clarify, I was talking about my US colleagues. We pay about half. So most people that come to work for us take a 50% pay cut, including me.
Yeah.
Still, after 8 years.
Yeah, so we've been talking for a while about different challenges, but it is said that one of the best ways of learning is when you fail and then learn from a failure, right? So what would you say has been like one of the biggest mistakes you've made during your career in your company? And how would you have done it differently if you were able to go back?
Wow. We could have prepped this one. I would say not taking decisions quickly enough. I think that is the biggest mistake that you can make as a CEO. Although I haven't been a CEO very long yet. This is I've been in the role now since November. But before that, I was Chief Finance Officer at Meris, who's a company I'm sure you all are familiar with. And I think not taking decisions quickly enough are things you can learn from. So you need to quickly take a decision. When we ultimately decided to start preparing for an IPO, I think we waited a little bit too long with taking that decision. But once we did, we started running and realised we should have started it 6 months earlier. So that's the only. I haven't got anything tangible that I could say that is a mistake I made. I would always do it differently, other than don't be afraid to take decisions and stick to them.
I was hoping he was going to go next.
We're still very young, so not a lot of time for mistakes. But
they put lots of pressure on me now.
I think that obviously I've made a lot of mistakes, but none of them have been that severe because we're still young. The thing I would do differently, I think, is that, and we talked about this a lot already, but it's recruitment. And the reason why I was hesitant to do this is because I'm both CEO, but I'm also the founder, and so this has been my baby for years. And then you kind of, the idea of handing off responsibility on everything you created is a very strange thing, and you've kind of built up a confidence that you can pull it all the way through to stages that you realistically can't. And fortunately, we're still in a position that it hasn't become a problem, but if I had to do it all over again, I would start building out the team on day one, looking for the best people, because it takes a long time and it takes a lot of energy and a lot of resources. And once you hit the point where you need them, it's far too late. And that is very crucial to anticipate on that.
So we've made a lot of mistakes, right? So I've been around. Our company's 8 years old, so I could probably give you one for each year. To put them into at least one for each year, like catastrophic mistakes. I think to put them into categories, we talked about talent. I've made some shocking mistakes with hiring people, probably too much based on technical skill versus fit, and that's always a temptation. So you're always tempted by someone who's got brilliant technical skills, and in the back of your mind, you think, actually, I'm not really sure this person really is going to have the risk tolerance, the ambiguity tolerance, is going to play nice with the other super smart people. But you kind of go through it, and then very quickly you realize, oh my God, this is a disaster. The second thing we did is a philosophical mistake. We were talking about this in terms of our equity structure. So we have an equity structure where it's plain vanilla common shares. And we, the three founders, still hold above 75%, which is great. But it's actually a mistake. It would have been really good to bring VCs in early, because we would have made them a lot of money by now, which means we'd have lots of people being positive and saying nice things about us, and all the playing the kind of, and that's a mistake. And if we're doing some spin-outs now, we're doing a number of spin-outs, and we're involving VCs almost as key opinion leaders. So I think if you accept that we all live in this environment, it's quite important to develop credibility so that you don't have to say how wonderful your company is. Or in our case, we just wait. We rely for clinical data. So we're very low key. We tend to just make announcements based on this is what we've actually done. We don't say we're going to do something. We just wait and then say this is what we've done. But it's much better to have VCs and investors, running around saying how fantastic you are, because it makes that whole part of the business easier to run. So I think that's probably our biggest mistake. We should have brought VCs in the A round or the B round.
Okay. Are there any questions? Because not for now. Okay. Feel free to just raise your hand if you have any questions. I think then what I'll ask is, obviously the finish line for biotech companies is commercialization, right? So how early does one have to start preparing for that?
I'll start, because for me it's the longest. So we focus on orphan disorders, and that actually puts us in a very interesting position, because even though we're in preclinical stages now, I'm already faced with the very, let's say, blunt question of what's your drug going to cost? And it's a very strange question, because we live in a world where reaching that stage is the ultimate goal, and there are very, very few people that do. So I have never thought about what it will cost. But the way it's been in the media, and the way, especially orphan pricing, has been a hot topic. It's something that is literally a day-to-day concern for me now. How are you going to commercialize a product that you have still no idea if it's actually going to work? And the interesting part of that is that commercialization for us is not a big topic. In fact, I find focusing on it might hinder actual development, and so I would pose the argument against it. I think focusing on commercialization should never be an argument in any stage of your development, because it's 100% hypothetical, and if you reach it, the market itself will adapt. I mean, I think patisiran from Alnylam is a great example. How many people in the world know what ATTR amyloidosis is? But it's an idea that turned into a medicine, and it's so rare that it's very exciting. And by that time, the world will change on the basis of your proof. And now you just have to show that proof. So for us, that is very far in the future, and I think something that will follow the natural process if we are lucky enough to reach that stage.
I fully agree, and Ajan might have a different opinion because you are much closer than either Thomas or I are. We still have to start in the clinic. It's imminent. Next quarter we'll dose our first patient. That's what we're focusing all our attention on. Will the first clinical trial, will the first 10, 20 patients be dosed successfully, and what will we see? Obviously, we're then also thinking about follow-on studies and how will we develop the product towards the market, but we don't think beyond that at this stage. I think it is a development plan, not yet a commercialization plan.
Yeah, I'm afraid I'm going to be controversial. Yeah. So we
expect anything else.
Yeah, we do everything the other way around. So we have 3 platform technologies. We build a target product profile for everything in preclinical, in discovery, and we kill things early if they're not going to have a target product profile that we like. So we've got 6 products in the public domain, and we've killed about 30. And so we're just, we're really, we back our teams completely. So, our culture is, it doesn't matter if your product doesn't make it past the first gate. There's another 50 for you to look at. So just go for it, do it as quickly as you can, and if it dies early, that's no problem, because there's something else. But we, you know, if we ever get into a discussion with a VC or we have a partnership with a big pharma company, it's a 10-minute discussion on valuation, because we just share our model, they share their model. It's a target product profile, which is a standard pharma model. You've got the MPVs, you've got the probabilities. It's very straightforward. And then all you're talking about is how likely is it to succeed. Just one conversation.
Maybe that depends what your product profile is, because if you look at our product or potential product, we wouldn't know yet which indication. So it's solid tumours in oncology. It's kind of a big field. So it would be, we could pick the biggest three and say that's our product profile. Yeah. It's yet to be demonstrated in the clinic if they're going to be the three or if it's going to be in 10 solid tumours all in one. Sure. So I think that very much depends on what field you're active in.
And I think we talked about, luckily for us in Europe, valuation's never going to be up here anyway, right? So people are always going to take the worst case. So I mean, so we talked about Alnylam. That was one of the deals I did at Roche. When we looked at that, what you do is you just look at what would you need to believe to invest, right? So do you have to be successful in one indication, two indications? You know, so to me, I think it's actually very easy to give people complete creative freedom if you all agree what the rules are for success. The problem you have in a company or in any project is when we're not clear on what success versus failure is, and if you punish people for failure. So we're just, we have target product profiles, we all agree them, everyone goes for it. If it doesn't work, we move on to the next thing. No issue. And we retain people, because people love the idea of we can just go for it. There's no punishment involved. We just got to finish the project and let's hope that it works. So I'd say it's a different culture, but it's just...
I think if it's a clear-cut picture, it's a very good approach to have and a very cost-efficient and will lead to success the quickest way. But yeah, it is very specific for what field you're in. So great that it works for you.
And I guess what's interesting for us, I guess, is we killed a project 3 years ago because we couldn't get a specific type of cell to expand. Now the technology's come for that expansion, so we can restart the project, which is great. So as long as your rules are clear, you can also move as technology evolves. So I agree with what you're saying. Technology will evolve, of course it will. But if you're clear about commercial markets evolve much, much, much more slowly. Yeah, it's so easy to predict where there's going to be gaps in pipelines. Big pharma analysts do it all the time. So actually a commercial segment, and if you look at the analysis, BCG did some brilliant analysis which shows if you're first to market and best in class, you'll typically capture 40 to 50% of the market. If you're second to market and best in class, you'll get 30%. So this data is available. You can model it really, really simply. So it's actually very easy for you to understand, if it's going to take us 8 years to develop the product in a particular niche of solid tumor, how much money is this going to be worth? And that data is really powerful, because then you are as informed as your potential investor, which makes for much more straightforward conversations. But it also helps you make internal decisions, because all of us are resource constrained, right? We've all, if you're in a platform company, your problem's always you have more innovation than you can take to market. So how do you make decisions that everyone can agree on, that you can pull a team around? And we found, it's interesting, scientists don't like PowerPoint, they like Word. And the finance people don't like Word, they like PowerPoint. But everyone loves Excel. So you can use Excel models, and it's the language of communication. So as long as you can get a target product profile and come up with some numbers, then everyone's on the same page.
Okay. We're almost running out of time. Are there any questions before we close the panel?
Yeah.
Please.
Yeah, thank you. Antoine, working for FTI Consulting. So, I was wondering, so we heard a lot of very interesting points. One thing that we have not discussed, and I was wondering if that's because it's not really key to your growth, is the regulatory issues. Is that something you are facing in your development as an issue? And how does this plays, since you've been working in the US, you are in Europe, so is there a sort of a best in class there, or how do you feel about this? Thank you.
So we've got we're still working with we've got a CTA already. We're filing an IND, and we're also with our partner doing a P with the PMDA in Japan. So in theory, the Japanese regulatory system is the gold standard, but in practice, it's quite difficult to work. The US, we don't know, right? So the system keeps changing. We had another update last week. In theory, RMAT is fantastic. I think there's about 12 companies that have been given RMAT designation. And the most recent communication from the FDA says that cell therapies will be accelerated. So in theory, that works very well. But our personal experience has been both the EMA and FDA are very, very supportive. As long as you really understand what you're talking about, I'm an ex-consultant, so please give me the caveat. What we found is it's so much better if you just talk to the regulator yourself, because the regulators in the cell and gene therapy area are super sophisticated. They are scientists typically, and they want to understand from you, the people who did the work, what you were doing. So it's not, they don't want to just know the results. They want to know what was your hypothesis. What are the things that you don't know? And if you're open about that, they will help you. It's certainly been a real learning for me, the difference in philosophy now as a small company versus when you work as a big company. The regulators are very helpful. And if you've got super innovative products like my colleagues have got here and hopefully like we have, then the regulator is highly incentivized and highly keen to help you. But the FDA is very structured. The EMA takes a risk-based approach. But we found them both equally helpful. There are specific rules. I mean, you just got to figure the rules out, right? So the FDA wants double-blind placebo-controlled study even for the last animal study that you do. They want that to be run like a human clinical trial. In Japan, they want to have very detailed sourcing information of each individual donor to a level which is far beyond Europe or the US. So there are nuances, but it's pretty straightforward. And if you, I think, embrace that conversation as a consultation before you file, then you'll find it very powerful and very helpful.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Our experience is the same. We've had interactions with the EMEA because we're about to start the trial in Europe and are starting interactions now with the FDA. And what that's exactly my experience, that they are much more helpful than that I would have anticipated beforehand. I would have thought they were very rigorous and, that you submit your questions, they will give answers that you can kind of interpret either way. And the opposite is the truth. We have had interactions where they have had a huge panel of experts, and particularly if you are in an innovative area, which we are, they are prepared to have discussions with you. So yeah, I couldn't agree more than what you've said, than what you've said. Thomas, you haven't had interactions yet.
I actually have a little. So being in the orphan space makes it very interesting because the scrutiny it's been under with Spinraza and Orkambi has kind of increase the demand of a new type of clinical trial, because if you know who your patients are and they have such a severe disease, there's an opportunity to redesign. But like Ajan said, you have to know what you're doing, basically, to sum it up. And so for us already, we're initiating talks with EMA to kind of bounce our ideas off of them, say this is what we want to look for, this is the science that backs it up. If we reach the stage of clinical development, would this be something you agree with? And they're very open to this negotiation because at the end of the day, they want to help you succeed. If the therapy can succeed, they want it to. And you just have to be smart about it and control as many variables as you can. And then it becomes more of a discussion than a negotiation, really. And it's a very helpful organ to have at your disposal, especially since it's coming to Amsterdam now. It's a great look for us, and it makes it a lot more, let's say, sorry for you guys, but a lot more accessible.
All right. And yeah, I think we've covered a lot of the challenges. I hope it's been helpful for everyone trying to build their company. And thanks to all of you for your time.